that entire world of SaaS security is not really properly protected today, because a lot of organizations back in 2021 mostly focused on production. And I think in general in 2024, we're seeing a rise in the amount of SaaS security focused breaches, right? Attackers, all they needed is to find one account without MFA in a test environment, which a lot of customers tend to neglect in terms of their security practices. From there, they were able to read emails of Microsoft's corporate environment, and all that is through a series of SaaS misconfigurations.
Who says tech can't be human?
We have a very special show for you today, SaaS applications. So let's talk about them. They're essential for business. And we know that because, we see in major headlines, the risks that come along with putting our data into SaaS applications. It's in the headlines because we put our sensitive information into these applications, and they all come with their own unique settings and configurations, which makes it a little bit harder for us to not find ourselves vulnerable when it comes to onboarding and using SaaS applications. We got good news though. There's light at the end of the tunnel, and it's a bright light. It's called Valence Security. Valence, they've been a partner to us for about 4 months now, and I met their co-founders, I met their executives. I'm 100% confident that by checking them out, you're gonna walk away with some ideas on how to step your SaaS security strategy up, and you'll probably wanna meet them too. And to meet them now, I actually have a special guest who is the Valence Security CEO and co-founder. I have Yoni Shohet. Yoni, welcome to the stream and the show.
Yeah, thanks, Ron. It's great being here.
It is great to have you. It's always great to speak to someone from Valence. You all really care about the space and about the audience as well. One of the things that I first learned about you and also your co-founder is that you both had bachelor's, your co-founder had a master's degree before the time that y'all were 20. What's up with that? Did y'all go to the same school or something?
Yeah, so it's funny, but no, we didn't meet until after that. We were probably in our 30s, but yeah, I started my bachelor's degree when I was 16, finished it when I was 19. Lomi, my co-founder, actually finished his master's by the age of 19, which is quite unique. So it was always when we were fundraising and kind of the team slide with the background, it was always a good and funny joke. And we always would also joke that we were looking for a third co-founder with a PhD before the age of 19. We never found one on time that was relevant, but it was always a joke, and it's funny coincidence, not more than that probably.
So besides getting your bachelor's at such an early age, kudos and shout outs to you for, committing and dedicating time to yourself to, be better. How did you get to becoming a co-founder? I always think it's interesting the circumstances or situations that lead to someone starting not one business, but you started two now.
Yes, I think like a lot of Israelis, I started my mandatory service in the Israeli intelligence forces after my bachelor's when I was 19. And through my service there, which I finished as a captain after I went to officer school and so on, it really forces you to every day reinvent yourself and be the better version of yourself and break any glass ceiling that you ever thought about. And I think once you go through that route and you experience the thrill, the excitement of, besides serving for your country, but also creating, all the time pushing yourself to the limit and beyond. Once I finished my service, I really knew that that's kind of the direction I wanted to go to. And I think that always I loved the leadership positions and being able to influence on strategy, to influence teams, to build teams, and experience how I can teach myself how to do a lot of things, learn from others and how to do a lot of things, and all the time experience more and more exciting experiences on a day-to-day basis.
Love that. I have some predictions as to why you chose SaaS security. It's a hot space. It's heating up day by day because we're using more, and also there's more headlines coming out about, the mistakes that we ultimately make or the vendors that we trust our data with. But give us a rundown how you chose SaaS security as a space that you thought was, essential to solve for the enterprise.
Yeah, so before you commit to starting a company, typically you go through that ideation phase where you look at different ideas, you talk to the market, you build a team, you understand how that looks like. And when Shlomi, my co-founder, and myself started that ideation phase, we started by looking at how SaaS applications are integrating with each other. Think about Calendly that has access to your Google Calendar or Microsoft 365 Calendar, or when you integrate Gong to Salesforce and all these app to app or SaaS to SaaS integrations. And when we started to pull that thread and we spoke with a lot of CISOs, a lot of them brought up a lot of challenges that they have related to these applications and how they manage it. And the fact that kind of the repeating theme was, yeah, but eventually there is an owner, there's an admin, Salesforce admin, Workday admin, a GitHub admin. There's some kind of an admin that has the privileges to make changes in these configurations. When we started to pull that strings and we started to work with our early adopters and our early customers, we eventually realized that that entire world of SaaS security is not really properly protected today, because a lot of organizations back in 2021 mostly focused on production, like my application secure, is my infrastructure, my cloud infrastructure secure, and less focused on more the enterprise or the corporate side of the organization. And therefore, we saw an uptick from there and focus on SaaS applications, which I think really got to some kind of a peak this year, given a lot of the recent events.
I think sometimes security practitioners, and I've been in this situation, we give vendors a tough time. We give them a tough time because as new technologies come out, we quickly want to, say, well, it's actually a lot like this. When I first learned about SSPM, which is SaaS Security Posture Management, I'm sure that someone has struck back and said, well, isn't that CASB? Aren't you essentially a CASB solution or this other acronym that's out there? What is SSPM and how is it different than the other things that we've seen out there in the wild already?
Yeah, so the easiest way to think about it is like CSPM for SaaS, right? We all adopted, a lot of organizations adopted CSPM or CNAP, whether if it's vendors like Wiz or Orca or one of these vendors, to protect their cloud infrastructure and look into how the infrastructure is configured and whether or not there are any exposure to that infrastructure. Very similar to that, you also need a SaaS security posture management that will look into these applications and monitor the different configurations there, whether if it's identities, how the security configurations, basically the admin settings look within these tenants, how your data is exposed, third-party integrations or non-human identities across these applications are very critical to monitor within these applications. And most CASB solutions, which was more or less treated as SaaS security about a decade ago, it has shifted to more become a SASE play, SASE, and more looking at that user to SaaS layer rather than how the SaaS application itself is configured. And therefore, they don't really cover a lot of the modern risks that are associated with the complexity of configurations, toggles, changes that you can make within these business critical SaaS applications that can significantly impact your posture and your exposure, the exposure of the data that is hosted within these applications. So probably not CASB, because CASB is not really focused on how the applications themselves are configured, and more similar to the need for a CSPM for SaaS applications.
Please allow me to jump in for a second and share a few details about our sponsor for this episode, Valence Security. We all contribute to the SaaS security problem. Have you recently connected an AI tool to Google Calendar or even Slack? Or have you shared a file by enabling anyone with the link to open it? Oops. With SaaS tools managed by different teams, IT can't see everything. This is where Valence Security comes in. Their team provides SaaS security posture management and remediation capabilities that enable your company to find and fix SaaS risk. From misconfigurations and identity risks to third-party integrations, Valence Security has you covered. With their solution, you can easily reduce your attack surface with automated workflows and business user collaboration. You can secure your SaaS environment today with Valence Security. Check them out by visiting valencesecurity.com and let them know that Hacker Valley sent you. Thank you, Valence Security, for sponsoring this episode. Got you. It makes a lot of sense. I mean, if you were to start a business today, you're going to need to invest in something like Google or Microsoft, and that's going to provide a whole host of productivity and collaboration opportunities. You might need to get a CRM, you might need to get Salesforce, then you need to get another tool. And I'm sure that, when I think about posture, I think about sitting up tall, and it seems like that's what we're doing for the security settings, configurations. But there's also an aspect of integration. Once you have a tool like Slack and then you connect it to Google Drive, now that introduces a whole nother can of worms. So how should organizations or leaders be thinking about like integrating with other applications? Because it's a necessity, but how should we be thinking? What should be the questions we should be asking ourselves before, clicking allow?
Yeah. So an interesting story from my ideation days before we started Valence, I installed Zoom or purchased Zoom as a license to do like customer interviews, and I recorded a lot of the conversations. And I didn't want to pay for a Zoom storage, so I wanted to move it to Google Drive where I already paid for storage. So I went to the Zoom marketplace and I searched for Google Drive, and there was one result. It was called Google Drive. It had the logo of Google Drive, and when I clicked install, I got a consent screen with a different third-party vendor, neither Zoom or Google Drive, that asked for permissions for both my Google and my Zoom, and wanted to basically leverage access to both different SaaS applications and become a connector between them. So I think a lot of companies, when they think about the security and the posture of their applications, they think, okay, yeah, I have my Microsoft 365, I have my SSL, let's say Okta beforehand, and all my users are properly authenticated, they're only using my managed devices, and we're all good. But then the users, when they log into the platforms, they can click, I agree to Calendly. Now Calendly has the same access as the user. And maybe they click a consent to a new Gen AI tool that scans all their emails and suggests new emails for them, and basically now has very high privilege access to their environment. Most of these vendors, once they're granted access, nobody remembers to go and ungrant their access and remove it like we offboard employees and contractors. So you need to build all these security practices around how do I manage what vendors have access through these basically unsecure paths into my platforms, and basically have equivalent privileges as my users, but are not guarded as my users are.
One aspect of SaaS security that I've been hearing more and more about is people want their users to use LLMs. LLMs can help summarize and answer some of those language-based challenges that we don't necessarily want to spend time with. And we want to put guardrails on what a user is able to put into an LLM. And I would imagine it's the same thing for integrations, the same things for OAuth grants and whatnot. What have been the most surprising ways that you've really educated your users, and in addition to helping them stop and remediate those threats?
So I think a lot of users think about the adoption of LLM as kind of the prompt in ChatGPT of, okay, I'm typing in a question and I get an answer. But the way to scale the adoption of ChatGPT or LLMs within organizations of generative AI is really through the power of integrations, right? I don't want to every time manually write, hey, ChatGPT, can you please help me write that email? I want that to be embedded into my mailbox, and I want that to read all my previous emails so it also adopts to how I like to write my emails. I want to feed it training data so it's more customized to my needs, right? So thinking about how did that operationally work, I need to consent or grant access to that third-party generative AI tool and say, hey, I want you to have access to my data now. I want you to read that data, and I want your output to be customized to my needs. But then the next step is, okay, I fed it my data. What did it do with my data? Did it keep it to also train the other models? Is it going to be used for output for other users for that product? How does that look like when I granted a very wide access to my data? How is that leverage afterwards to their benefit, and how is that exposing my potential sensitive data because I'm eventually feeding it with potentially the most sensitive data information? Like I'm the CEO of the company, I have information about our financials, about a lot of the sensitive information in my inbox. Once I feed it to an external third-party vendor, I have almost no control over where it goes from there.
Yeah, that is the scary part. I feel like that's also making it somewhat opportunistic for us to continue to grow large language models. I feel like the only way for them to get better, less bias, is for us to feed it a ton of data. But we want to do that in the right way. And I think it's tough to know if you're doing the right thing or not. And I think the best way to know if you're doing the right thing is hearing what are some of the things that I shouldn't be doing, especially, or the things that might seem crazy from an external perspective. What have been the most surprising, like in a crazy way? Like I was not expecting this to be configured this way. And, ultimately Valence helps prevent or mitigate that threat. What's been a surprising one that you've seen so far?
In many cases, we find a failed offboarding of security vendors. So think about how you do an evaluation. Let's say I want to test three different vendors. All of them need access to, let's say, my Google Drive data. I test
Yep.
all three of them for DLP use cases. I choose one, I purchase that solution. How many security teams actually go and offboard those third-party vendors that now still have valid API access to their data? You never think about these platforms as data sharing platforms, but almost any SaaS application today has the ability for you to upload files to them and share it with anybody with a link. And then
Mm-hmm.
almost all your security controls, your MFA, your SSO, your ability to create that trusted zone around your identities breaks down because it now is anonymously available to anybody with a link. And we found some applications that our users were very concerned when they found out that, oh, we never thought that that application that we don't even administer, that somebody else owns within the organization, is actually used to share files externally and basically to exploit data
Mm-hmm.
potentially. It's used for good purposes, not for malicious purposes, but could be used for potentially malicious acts externally from the organization, and that's a real eye opening for a lot of teams.
Yeah, that's definitely eye-opening, especially for, the fact that many of the apps that we use are data sharing apps now. Like pretty much every app that I use personally, SaaS app especially, there's like a share link and it's like you can hit invite specific people. You need to buy licenses for that though if they're going to be able to collaborate in that tool. And then if you don't, then you have to open up that link for anyone to view. So I could see that being definitely a flaw in our thinking, and we saw that already with S3 buckets. At first, the attacker was very distracted with, writing exploits, doing buffer overflows, and then they ultimately want the data. They found a way to just search for S3 buckets and then say, all right, I'm going to try to traverse this open S3 bucket. They found sensitive information and we adapted. And it seems like now that adaptation for open resources is in the cloud. When it came to S3, I think it took a while for us to learn how to write policies. And I don't know if there's a way to think, a methodology for thinking about SaaS settings or even the policies. What is your take on building resilient SaaS policies so you don't find yourself in these vulnerable situations?
Yeah, so I think, like I mentioned earlier, the days of just blocking everything by default is over. You need to really enable stuff, especially even if you enable external sharing for only specific users, for only a specific group, that can still be either abused or misused and eventually lead to oversharing of files that you need to, or data that you need to afterwards control. The best ways that we help our customers with is really the ability to set up automated policies that help to right size the privileges based on the actual usage. Because the business is going to need to share files externally. You could put some kind of guardrails based on classification, based on who is it shared with. Maybe you don't want to now open with a link, only fine grained sharing based on specific emails, which is fine. But eventually files are going to get shared and you're going to need to play that whack-a-mole game of, okay, something was shared, what do I do with it now? And what we help our customers with is really to set up automated policies so they don't need to think about it. But when something becomes idle, not used, there's no evidence of anybody really needing it or consuming it, we'll just take it away from the user.
You mentioned phishing as an example of something that was a challenge and we had to provide training and awareness on it. And when I think of SaaS, I kind of think of it like the scale of the challenge of phishing, where it's not going anywhere. It's going to be here for the foreseeable future. So we do have to really think about how are we gonna handle this? How are we gonna tackle it? Can an organization manage their own SaaS applications from a security perspective? Can you do it without technology?
So I think that there's a couple of challenges that make it very difficult to address it without technology. First is that each SaaS application is unique in its complexity, the terminology, the capabilities that it offers to you from a productivity perspective, right? There's a lot of toggles we can turn on and off. There's different terminology and what's a global admin or super admin or a local admin. There's different terminologies that you need to become experts of. You need to find them across the platform. And then the second challenge is that the people that make most of the decisions are distributed across the organization, whether if it's the admins themselves, right? There's the staff admins, in Salesforce, Workday, GitHub, so on, but also the business users that actually share with the link or actually click consent, they're also distributed across the organization. And when you think about how do you create proper visibility into the problem, the training, and the actual remediation, you need to combine very powerful visibility into help me better understand what are my actual risks here and how do I find the risks without having to flip my FTEs to become experts in each one of these individual SaaS applications. But also, how do I collaborate with my users in order to make this problem something that we work on together and not something that is just the security team's problem?
One area that I've been very impressed with when it comes to cybersecurity teams today is there's a lot more team members that understand the importance of the business. I think when I first got started, I didn't understand the importance of helping the business operate, helping the business scale. I wanted to stop the threat. I was just so focused on that. But now I think organizations, especially team members on the security team, are thinking about, if I bring down Salesforce, is that going to cost me? Is that going to cost my company money? And is it going to cost me my job? I think doing that at a major corporation, if you work for enterprise, you take down Salesforce, that is not going to be a good day for anyone. There's going to be a lot of drama. So I definitely think that is great that you'll have that interaction between humans and automation. I think that's the sweet spot. I spent years working at a company called Demisto, and that was ultimately acquired by Palo Alto Networks. We tried to automate everything from end to end, and it always ended up with, Ron, you got to jump on a call immediately because this playbook went wild. We got to turn it off. No one's getting their emails. And the cycle continued every use case that we would ultimately hit. But I really like the fact that there's some middle ground for security, but also input.
Yeah. We like to call it remediation by choice, right? It's not, you have different problems that require different solutions, and you need to have that ability to configure what on the scale of manual to automated, where on the scale automated between manual and automated you want to be, and where you want human in the loops and where you don't want human in the loops. And we provide our customers the ability to completely configure and have that customized in, let's call it the no-code interface, where they can really manage those decisions and then apply the policies without having to think about it, and also duplicate them between platforms, right? Most likely the way you handle something in one platform is how you're going to want to handle it in a different platform, and we can help you scale those processes from one platform to another.
There's 40 to 50 solutions in the space already. A lot of people are focused on SSPM, or at least they claim to because they heard Gartner. What makes Valence Security unique, one of a kind, the it factor for you all?
Yeah, so I think even SaaS security is a very broad term that is used for different purposes. But if we look specifically at the SSPM category, there are companies in this space that are doing a good job in just helping customers to better understand their problems. They have great reporting on risk, maybe on threats within the organizations, and provide you visibility into that. What makes Valence unique is that we have both the deep capabilities to provide you very good insights into here are your problems, but tie them with the ability to take action and remediation. Some of our customers call it magical in terms of the capabilities, or the easy buttons, or something that makes it very easy to go from find to fix. Saves our customers a lot of time in terms of how do they actually operationalize the risk reduction processes and go beyond just getting another dashboard with more problems that they don't have time to solve, to seeing actual measurable KPI progression in terms of how do I actually reduce my risks within organizations. So that remediation capability, and again, it doesn't have to be automated. It can be with business user collaboration, without it, with those chatbots, just a button that you can click. But the fact that we go beyond the visibility into remediation, but still have the very deep visibility into the platforms, we have probably one of the highest coverages in terms of SaaS applications that we can actually integrate with. We have very deep visibility into each one of them. So we don't fall from the kind of the deep visibility players, but we also combine that with remediation, and that unique balance between the ability to have a mature and advanced visibility together with these capabilities focused on remediation is quite unique within the industry, and it's helping us a lot.
When organizations, look at a product, I'm sure that part of it is because of something that they've seen on the news. And usually when I hear someone speak about the news and breaches or vulnerabilities, they say FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt. I don't look at it as FUD. I look at it as awareness. If there was poor quality in the air, I want to know about that. That's not necessarily going to make me fearful, uncertain, or doubtful, but it's going to help me make an informed decision, or it's going to help me find a solution so I don't find myself getting hurt. I think it's the same for medical. It's the same for like emergency services. It's not necessarily FUD. It's looking out for your best interests. I look at that, kind of like these pieces of news as things I could do to get better. And one thing that people are looking at that they're talking about constantly is this Snowflake breach. I'm sure that's one of the things that makes SaaS security really hot right now. We know that we need to enable multi-factor authentication. That's neither here nor there. I feel like organizations, we feel as though we're past that, but I don't know if we really actually are in practice. What have you seen that makes Valence even more relevant? Is it the Snowflake breach? And what are some of those initial fears that people have that make them want to say, all right, I need to at least have that conversation?
I think the main issue when it comes to SaaS security is that we're dealing with the unknowns. If I would ask a month ago, CISOs, what do you think about your Snowflake posture? They would say, yeah, it's great. We have MFA, we have SSO, it's amazing. A Snowflake breach attack happens. And I think in general in 2024, we're seeing a rise in the amount of SaaS security focused breaches, right? It started late 2023 with different Okta breaches. And then in January, Microsoft published a Microsoft Midnight Blizzard breach that basically the attackers, all they needed is to find one account without MFA in a test environment, which a lot of customers tend to neglect in terms of their security practices. And then from there, they jumped from their test environment using an OAuth API or a non-human identity between their test environment to production. From there, they were able to read emails of Microsoft's corporate environment. And all that is through a series of SaaS misconfigurations. In this case, it's both the vendor and the customer, so the shared responsibility, it's probably different teams in Microsoft, but it's the same shared responsibility model. But this is a repeating thing that we see across the year, whether it's a Midnight Blizzard and Cloudflare, we saw Sisense, Dropbox Sign, now Snowflake, there's again and again and again breaches where the attackers are either targeting the vendors themselves, the SaaS vendors, because from there they can spread to all their customers, or targeting the shared responsibility model of the customer side, which is mostly where Valence can come in and help our customers to ensure that even the test environment or the sandbox environment is properly secure, because a lot of time they have either access to production or they hold very sensitive information, even though they're test or dev environments.
Yeah, it's wild that multi-factor authentication is looking at us right in the eyes. And there's a choice that we all have, especially the vendors that like Snowflake, enable by default or just enable all the way and don't allow anyone to disable that feature. I think it's pretty wild that, these, multi-factor authentication specifically is not enabled by default for every single SaaS application. That is the best way in, is through getting a password. And let's be honest, if you're on an airplane and you're trying to log into your airline account because you're trying to get on the internet, that moment of trying to get on the internet and opening up your password manager might prevent you from being able to open it because you don't have the internet yet to grab your password for your airline miles. I run into that all the time when I travel. I have to remember to grab my password from my password manager and copy it to my clipboard and then connect to the Wi-Fi so I could paste it in without it trying to go to the cloud and pull my password. Because in situations like that, we're going to default to typing in a password that we are going to know and is likely going to be related to a password that is already out there in the wild that an attacker is going to use and guess. It's not that hard to guess a password or a variance of a password. Once you have that initial string, it's numbers, letters. A lot of the times it's the number one or exclamation point.
Yep. And I think also we found, and we also published it in our last year's SaaS Security report, every customer we met did not properly enforce MFA to 100% of their users. 100% of customers did not do that. And the 100%. Reason is 100%. The reason is that there's always exception groups. Always. There's always the service accounts, the shared accounts, the contractors, we offboarded them from here, but not from there, and we wanted to make sure they can still access. There's always reasons. Once you go with one exception, it's very hard for that one to become 10 and for that 10 to become 100 if you don't properly monitor that. So always MFA is a great way to help secure it. Also, MFA comes in different shapes and forms, right? You can do MFA with text and MFA with more biometric devices and others. But there's always some kind of a way to create exceptions, and organizations typically opt into that option. And then from there, you need to make sure you properly manage your exception groups. Otherwise, you'll be at risk.
When I worked at cybersecurity vendors, some of our customers would try to go real slick. They would essentially try to buy one license and like have a bunch of non-human identities using the platform APIs, and then presenting what's presented in the UI on their own custom UI. And they would say, oh, well, we need to present metrics a certain way. So how do vendors typically think of providing these non-human identities? Because we all need API access to some degree, but how do you make it a win-win so they're getting the APIs that they need and doing it without accessing the UI, but where they're also not abusing it as well?
Yeah, so that's a great example on exception groups of the MFA, right? Because most likely these NHIs didn't have MFA, and that's how it starts. And then you need to make sure that SSO is not enforced, and from there it goes.
Yep.
Especially for security tools that have very high privilege access to information and data and access within the organization, especially for security vendors, but obviously for any vendor, making sure that the data that enterprises need programmatically is available through API is critical. Unfortunately, as a company that developed almost 100 different SaaS connectors, this is not an easy task, and every organization has their own approach for building their APIs. So really being able to ensure that as a vendor that you make the right data available for your customers as they need it is probably the best way. As a product manager, I would recommend organizations that get that request from their customers of give me a non-human identity so I can scrape your web. I would ask, what data do you need for my API so I can make it available? So please do not do that. But unfortunately, not all vendors think about it that way, and not all vendors are even aware that that's how their product is actually being used through these web scraping.
Yeah. And on top of that, what I always think of, especially whenever I do work on the enterprise side, I like to do a little bit of a mix between working in corporate security and then working as a vendor. And whenever I worked in corporate security and enterprise security, I would reach out to my vendor and just start the conversation. Hey, I don't want to breach this contract, because you could do that from the customer side. I think that's a very sensitive thing. You gotta have integrity with the agreements that you make. So reach out to your vendor, say, hey, how can I, leverage these non-human identities? We have an API. I want to make sure that it's in accordance with my licenses. But like you're saying, that's huge. That's how we get access as attackers. Getting access to an API might be better than getting access to a human identity, because there's a lot less paper trails for APIs.
Yep. Also, a lot of the vendors don't generate enough logs on it. Most organizations don't monitor it the same way.
Yeah.
Because they assume that everything goes through MFA. So a lot of these assumptions eventually lead organizations or attackers to leverage these less secure identities, APIs, tokens, non-human service accounts for their better good.
Yeah. I think the best way to get better is by taking advice from others. Years ago, one of my mentors, Marcus J. Carey, he wrote a book called Tribe of Hackers. He also then went on to write a few other Tribe of Hackers books. And in the very first book, he was asking everyone for one piece of advice. I said, my piece of advice for anyone trying to get better at security is to enable multi-factor authentication. Sounds like that's still true to today for, especially entering in this world of SaaS. But what's your one piece of advice to get one step better at SaaS security for all of the leaders and practitioners that are watching this today?
Yeah, so I think the key to build an effective SaaS security program is to understand that SaaS is not a classic centralized IT managed problem. And I think in general, cloud is shifting away from that mindset. The key is, how do you enable the proper collaboration? How do you work with the business users and admins together to ensure proper security of your SaaS applications? Because without that, anything that you will do will be eventually bypassed by the users, or they'll find a workaround to it. You need to understand their challenges, understand their needs, what they're trying to achieve, and find the best way to enable it together with them, because it's a better together story rather than anything else.
Love that. For anyone that's out there right now that wants to learn more about Valence, that's interested in getting started, what is the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, so feel free to reach out to me. I'm available obviously on LinkedIn and happy to chat. We have our website, valencesecurity.com, and we're happy to, of course, chat with anybody who is interested to learn more about the space, see a demo, and hear more about kind of our success stories in the industry.
Be sure to check out Valence, valencesecurity.com. As Yoni mentioned, I speak to every cybersecurity founder that comes on the podcast, especially if they work at a vendor. And I've said it before, I'll say it again. the Valence Security team is special. Yoni, big thank you to you for coming on out of your busy day, spending a few minutes with us. Wherever you're watching, be sure to check out the comments, descriptions, and you can find and connect with Yoni and also learn more about Valence. Yoni, thank you again. And with that, we will see everyone next time.